In addition to the increased diversity of screen sizes, you'll also need to deal with the growing issue of screen densities. Screen density is the number of pixels within a physical area of a screen, and newer screens are featuring higher and higher screen densities every year. Take these two iPhones, for example. This one is the older 3G model, while this is the newer 4S. The 3G has a screen resolution of 320 pixels by 480 pixels, while the 4S has a resolution of 640 pixels by 960 pixels. Now, they both have the same size screen at 3.5 inches, so in order to have a higher resolution, the 4S has to have a greater number of pixels. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward, but it actually causes a number of issues that you have to understand when designing for higher density screens. The first issue is properly defining what exactly a pixel is when you're dealing with higher density screens. Now, if you've been designing for any time at all, you probably think you've got a pretty good handle of what exactly a pixel is. But for screen density, we actually need to focus on two types of pixels: hardware pixels and reference pixels. Hardware pixels are pretty straightforward. Let's zoom in on an older, lower density screen. Here you can see the individual pixels themselves. These are hardware pixels, and they represent the smallest points that a screen can display. If we look at the same cross-section of a higher density screen, you can see that in this example, the number of hardware pixels are doubled, allowing the screen to display finer detail within the same dimensions. However, this increase causes unintended side effects. Let's say you had a line of text that was 30 pixels high on a lower density screen. The same text mapped to the higher density screen would now appear twice as small. That means, without accounting for this difference, graphics and websites would appear dramatically smaller on newer, higher density displays. That's where reference pixels come in. A reference pixel, sometimes referred to as a CSS pixel, is a unit of measurement that establishes an optical standard for the length of a pixel and is totally independent of hardware pixels. In the W3 standard for CSS, this unit is described as roughly 1/96th of an inch, depending on the ideal distance from the viewer. Although the definition may vary from platform to platform, the concept is the same. The reference pixel gives you a way to consistently set the size of elements that is independent from the actual screen density. Okay, so let's go back to our pixel example. If you specified that an element be 50 pixels wide, it might map to the first screen at exactly 50 pixels if the hardware and reference pixels were the same. On a higher density screen, however, the device would actually display the same element over 100 hardware pixels to ensure that it remains the same visual size. It does this by applying a scaling factor to the page elements. This scaling factor is often referred to as device pixel ratio. That is, the ratio between reference pixels and hardware pixels. Knowing the proper ratio is crucial for targeting and properly preparing graphics for higher density screens. To see how this is taking shape across manufacturers, let's take a moment to look at the Mobile Matrices page created by the nice people over at the Mobile Boilerplate. Here we can see the listing of several mobile devices, their screen size, resolution, and screen density. If we compare the older iPhone and iPads to the newer ones, we can see that the screen densities are exactly double, which means the device pixel ratio for the new Retina displays is 2. When we take a look at Android devices, however, the ratios get a bit more complicated. There are so many manufacturers working with different screen densities that you can't assume a specific device pixel ratio for targeting higher density screens. In fact, Android uses 4 basic device pixel ratios. These are low density, or 0.75 for screens lower than 120 pixels, medium density, which is considered the baseline at 1 for screens up to 160 pixels, high density at 1.5 for screens up to 240 pixels, and then extra high density at 2 for screens up to 320 pixels. Higher screen densities aren't just limited to mobile devices either. Apple recently introduced a new MacBook Pro that has a screen density of 220 pixels, which is twice its other models, giving it a pixel density ratio of 2 as well. Okay, so now we know what screen density is and how hardware pixels relate it to reference pixels, but what does it mean to you in the real world? Well, in many cases, you won't need to do anything at all. For text in CSS-generated graphics, the device will handle the scaling itself and use the extra hardware pixels to make everything look clearer and sharper. For images, however, it can be a bit of an issue. Take a look at these two screens. On the left, you'll see an older iPad, and on the right, a newer model with a Retina display. Although the top image doesn't look too bad on either of them, the Retina display does look a little blurry. Notice that when I scale up on the Retina display, you can clearly see the degradation of image quality. The scaling factors involved in higher density screens can often actually harm image quality as they're scaling images up by default. If I compare it to the bottom image, which is a higher resolution version of the first graphic, you can see that there's a clear difference in image quality. When building responsive sites, you'll need to decide whether or not you also want to supply larger images for higher density screens. The methods behind doing this and the factors that you need to consider when making those decisions are considerable, so we'll tackle them next.